If this particular one, we already know the results. You have to deal with that also.
Well, that's what people will say as a defense mechanism when the polls don't favor their true, what they believe in. Because if I believe that I'm going to win, even when I know in my heart that I am not popular, but there's something else that convinces me that I'm going to win, then when an opinion poll that is scientifically done shows otherwise, then one of the things I rush to is saying, this thing has not been done the right way, this thing is flawed, it favors a particular candidate.
Someone paid for it.
So I worked at Ipsos for 5 years and I did the opinion polls with Tom Wolfe, and at no particular time did any presidential candidate or politician come and say, Victor, why don't you have this amount of money, or Tom have this? And
would you tell us if they did?
Of course.
No, you wouldn't.
Why not?
Why would you tell us if they paid for it?
Because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do when somebody is trying to influence or manipulate the process.
But there are those polls that are paid for,
and
right?
you know what? You know what? If I had been paid, I don't think NTV would invite me here today, because I have a reputation. And polling organizations that I have worked for, and I still work with an organization that is doing polling, we have a reputation to protect. And it's something that requires you to continuously know that this is the truth and you have to stand for it.
All right. Yeah. But there's nothing wrong with someone paying for an opinion poll to get the accurate results.
There are two different things here. And this is probably where people get it wrong. There is commissioning an opinion poll to understand. Okay. So a commercial organization like Ipsos would is obviously in business. So they do many other research surveys for different people, both corporate clients and individuals that want to understand different issues. There are those who want to understand whether their products are selling and why not. There are those who want to understand why citizens in a particular area have different attitudes towards a particular topic of interest. So that is called commissioning a survey. Okay. And then there is the one which most politicians will talk about, is paying you so that when the results show that Ken is popular, then you don't release, which does not happen. That does not happen. Okay. So there is the influencing the pollster to give results that are not real. That does not happen. And it's a misconception that people could be doing it. It doesn't mean, and the only people who say that most of the time are the politicians, in many cases, who are actually having a lot of baggage with corruption, because they believe because they're corrupt, everyone else around them should be corrupt. Just because you're corrupt does not mean everyone around this country is corrupt.
Do you think, in your opinion, opinion polling has been embraced in the country?
Well, yes, and to an extent, yes, by people who have actually followed and seen the benefits. To the larger population, citizens are still living in this the understanding is still very limited, because it's very hard explaining to some people that you don't need to interview 100,000 people for a nationally representative poll for you to just get what citizens are saying. The few people who have embraced it actually make the very best use of it, and they are there, and including politicians. They just won't talk about it in public. So what we need to know, and the simplest way to explain to citizens, is we simply pick randomly. The same way when you want to test how much sugar there is in tea, you don't need to drink the entire cup of tea. All you need is just a little gulp of it. Even when you have your salad, you just don't need to gulp everything for you to know that this thing is actually now really good. You simply take a little bit of it. So that is what happens. And it's the same thing that happens when you go to the hospital. When the doctor wants to check if you have malaria or not, based on the symptoms that you have given, they don't need to put you on a surgery bed and take everything out. They just drew a small sample of blood and then use that to test whether you have malaria or not.
That's a very convenient explanation for sampling.
It's exactly that science that happens in research. And let me just tell you, we live in a society that is predictable in terms of human behavior, same as political behavior, because one, the way information spreads in a particular village, for example, you think about your rural village. Most Kenyans, I think about 60% or so live in villages or rural villages in Kenya. Think about the issues that affect citizens in that village. If they have an issue with water, you don't need to get all the villagers lining up to tell you that, yes, we have a water problem. A simple random pick of about 10 or 15 or 20 households spread through the village will tell you that there is a problem with water. So you don't need all the villagers lining up
to come and explain
to the researcher or the pollster that in this village, one of the biggest problems you have is water. Now, secondly, the information within that ecosystem is also going to influence people's attitudes, okay? So if there are influential people or if there is a cultural belief, the way it happens is that they talk about it on a continuous basis. And as that continues to happen, they educate each other, best be it good information or bad information. So they continuously educate each other. And as they continue to pass this information, they start having beliefs. And when people form beliefs, it sticks with them and they believe it. So when you go asking people about particular issues, most of the information you get from one person, 2 people, 3 people, ends up being representative of that village. And that is what happens at a national level. On issues such as politics of elections, you know, it is very predictable. It is in most cases, it's known that people have preferences. A lot of it in Kenya has been influenced by ethnic loyalty, in which case I come from a particular tribe and there is very high likelihood that I will support a particular candidate. Not entirely though. Most of the time, ethnic loyalty, political supremacy is based on ethnic loyalty. So the people with the numbers from their ethnic groups will most likely be more popular and more supported by citizens. So in this case, like Kenya as an example, we don't need to interview the entire population to know what they're thinking. Okay. And we have been in this industry for a while, so there are polling results that have actually confirmed these things. Despite the US elections having a little bit of problems, and of course Brexit, I know people will be talking about Brexit. In Kenya here, our own research organizations have got it right, okay. Which means we have the expertise, we have the knowledge, and we have the know-how. So I don't think that because an American organization, polling organization got it wrong means that Kenyans are doomed. So
you're agreeing that polling has matured in Kenya?
It has matured.
How comes the overall performance never affects the approval rating? I'll give you an example.
Yes.
There's a poll that was done a while ago, and it was, I know you know about it, and it was quite stormy, Ipsos by Ipsos, and you just commenting over this generally, where if you look at the overall performance of the government, it was rated very poor overall, and yet individuals in the government are given very high rating, and yet these are the same individuals who are responsible for the overall score of the government. How is that possible?
Yes, and that's a disconnect that has been there for a while now, since the Jubilee, especially Jubilee government took office. And we struggled, especially before when I was with Tom, to try to explain to people that, listen, it's possible. Now, at the time, Jubilee was very heavy on public relations, and it did probably very well. I'm really sure about that, because one of the things that can explain that kind of a disconnect is when the leadership differentiates itself from the performance, the general overall performance. And the president confirmed it at one point when he was at the State House Summit on Corruption, when he said he was pointing fingers at the 3 officials that were there and trying to make it known to Kenyans that he has actually done more than what he was supposed to do, and that there are people in government failing. You see, what could that do? It ends up portraying the president and the presidency as really doing everything. But there are few or people around government frustrating the process. So in that case, when you interview citizens, one of the things they will most likely tell you, yes, the president is doing everything well, but the government officials. So in fact, Jubilee has done very well in terms of making it known that there are 2 different entities: the individuals, like the president and the deputy, and the government, which is not a good thing, because leadership is where citizens should be saying this is the source of the problem. So when citizens don't have water, they should be saying, yes, it's the government. The county government has failed, as well as the governor, because the governor is in charge of this.
That.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Today there will be results released, and I'm already reading a lot of possible fallouts.
Yes.
One is because not everyone can be favored by an opinion poll. One thing, before we get the reaction later, we'll get is accusations of paying for a poll, like we discussed,
yes.
Influencing poll and the rest. Is it possible that these fallouts can be tamed? And how can these fallouts be tamed by the researcher?
If I get you right, are you referring to fallouts within the
I'll give you an example. They're looking at what they call today pairings, and pairs that can have a chance against Jubilee, for example.
Yes.
Mudavadi and Raila, Kalonzo and Mudavadi,
okay.
like that. And at the end of the day, we don't know the results, but the results that will be out. If it's, for example, Mudavadi and Raila, for example, and Kalonzo has been the front runner, you will hear comes from Kalonzo saying, no, it was skewed to favor them so that I look bad, so that they go with it. Is it possible for the pollster to stem that before releasing the results, and how?
Well, the thing is this. These polls, as far as I know them, they are all based on general population numbers, and they are not based on the voter register. So that's one thing that I think Tom Wolf will need to make clear when he's making the announcement, because there's a difference between the two. When you have a general population survey, it means you're covering the views of all Kenyans 18 and above, whether they are registered to vote or not, which is in estimate about 22 million people or so. But then when you have a voter register population, then that is even, the precision is increased. So you stand a higher chance at looking at the possible outcomes when you have the voter register as the focus in terms of this kind of polls. So if these candidates that you're talking about will be looking at the results, and I want to believe that they will look at them keenly, and not just look at them, but also ask themselves questions without dismissing them for the sake of it. I think they stand a better chance from both sides, whether it's Jubilee or CORD, to make the best use of it, to tease what the numbers are not. I mean, sometimes looking at the numbers plainly is what you don't do. So when you look at a number and it's 45% or 48%, don't look at it that way and then go home heartbroken. You need to look at what
in totality
the 52% are telling you or not telling you. So I hope that they will today, instead of dismissing the polls, they will look at the story behind the numbers.
The numbers.
Yeah. Actually,
they're getting ready. We are having pictures live from Ipsos, where we'll be heading to shortly, as soon as they begin speaking at the Ipsos headquarters along Riverside Drive. We'll be getting back to them as soon as they're ready. But I have one more question as they get ready on the other side. The regional sampling. I have seen this has cropped up in the last few years, whereby you will see a pollster dividing regions and saying, do you trust Jubilee has done good work? So they'll sample from opposition stronghold, which obviously will be negative, and sample from Jubilee strongholds. These results are usually different. Why do they do that? Why don't you just take a general population in the country and sample instead? Because it's obvious. If you ask about president's approval rating, if you go to my home in Kisumu and ask, how do you think Uhuru Kenyatta has done? You're definitely getting a negative answer. If you go to Central, you'll get a positive answer. So why do they do this?
So at Twaweza, we have a policy that maintains the results at a national level, and also by gender and setting, which is urban-rural only. But this is something that Ipsos has done for a while in terms of grouping, showing the results by various supporters of various political groups. And I think there is a story behind it, which obviously would need a larger sample to tell. And I'm sure they have always indicated that for subgroups analysis, you need a larger sample for you to increase the level of the confidence interval. But the story is that sometimes politics plays a big role. That when I wear my ethnic glasses, thank God these ones are not ethnic. When I wear my ethnic glasses, I cease to be rational in the way I look at you. So much that sometimes even when you're doing very well, I don't want to talk about it when it comes to certain political issues. And that is what has consistently been communicated in those results. If I'm wearing ethnic glasses at the same time and I support you, I tend to make them darker they can be darker, so that even when you are doing some wrongs,
I refuse to see.
I refuse to see them. And I will always just say, for example, when you asked me, do you think the president is performing well in terms of handling the corruption issues in the country, or is the government doing well in terms of corruption in the country? I could remove my ethnic glasses and say,
and decide to see
no,
the reality.
I say, no, the government is doing poorly. But then when you ask specifically, do you think President Uhuru Kenyatta is doing so and so? I put my ethnic glasses and say, he's doing very well. So you see, that is what creates the mismatch. And that is a very beautiful story for researchers to tell, because it then tries to explain to you why, while we are expecting that citizens are more informed and will be doing things differently, it should also explain to you why, at the end of the day, even though I know Ken is a bad boy, I will still say, but he's my son. I will still just buy him sweets, you know, because there is that loyalty aspect. So that is, I think, the story that Tom Wolfe and Ipsos will probably be telling you when they're doing that kind of analysis. Otherwise, I think for most people, the question is, I mean, the issue would be, it's so obvious, they don't need to tell it, but it's not obvious. There is a very beautiful governance story there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And I think before we go to Ipsos, tell me, over time, there have been credibility issues. You have to agree with me. What has fueled these credibility issues, especially the traditional posters we have known, Sinovate, Ipsos, Ipsos Sinovate, Ipsos, all these other ones. I'm just mentioning that because that's why we are going live.
I don't know what you mean by credibility.
No one trusts them.
But why don't they trust them?
That's the reason I'm asking you. Why has there been that credibility issues with pollsters?
I don't think the issue has been credibility.
Did you suffer that when you were at Ipsos?
I didn't suffer any of that, and I don't think I've suffered that in my research career, which now this is my 11th year in the research industry. But the thing is this: credibility or no credibility, it depends on the person talking about it. If politicians are talking about credibility, then you don't follow that. I wouldn't follow that. But if the pollsters themselves are talking about credibility in one of them, then you need to be alarmed. If they have not done it, then I think we need to listen to more to the pollsters. They need to come out and explain themselves. But politicians, of course, like I told you before, they are the people who have raised the issue of credibility because sometimes they feel that these polls do not favor what they think or they want.
All right. I'm just looking at what's happening. What's happening now? I'm told they are not yet ready, so we will continue with this discussion, of course. Let's talk about the possible expectations. Right now, the country is already divided along tribal lines. And obviously, a lot of Kenyans are looking at, every time there's a result out, they're looking at it with a little more keenness than they used to. Do you think it's time opinion polls sat back and just waited for election to take place?
You see, opinion polls give an indication of what citizens or a particular population is speaking about. You know, what do citizens think? What is the direction that this conversation is taking? You cannot make that an assumption without certain facts. And those facts, you can only get them when you are doing some scientific research. So standing back or stepping back to say let everything take its course is not a good thing, because on top of the presidential popularity rating numbers that we get from Ipsos and organizations like ours, there is more to the numbers. You know, we for example at Twaweza have all this information about what citizens think about security, water availability of water, sanitation and hygiene issues, about people with disabilities, about health issues. So these issues should be telling you whether citizens are in support of a particular candidate because they feel those candidates will address those issues, or whether these popularity numbers that you have are just because citizens are being ethnically loyal. So for actors in this space, they need to look at these numbers differently. I mean, are we able to have shape citizen conversation so that even as they are talking about the leadership of so-and-so or so-and-so being more popular, are we able to influence what citizens think about these people, whether they are going to be responsive or not? Because one of the things that you would do, or the media should be doing right now, is telling citizens that even though so-and-so is popular, this is what he or she has achieved in terms of service delivery. And are citizens able to follow that so that they can make good decisions? When this person has delivered, then, and they're popular, then it should explain that. But if somebody is popular and they have not delivered, then citizens should be educated and told that, well, even though so-and-so is popular, these are the shortcomings. So you make a decision whether you want to vote for them or not. So it's just not about popularity numbers being splashed all over the media for the sake of it. There is always a way in which these numbers can be consumed to improve our leadership. Because we know, for example, in Kenya that there's a leadership gap. You know, the leadership is not handling many issues, both at the county level and at the national level, in ways that are satisfactory to many people. So rather than just telling people that so-and-so is popular, we need also to give these numbers so that citizens can reflect. It's a reflecting moment when I see that Ken is popular or Victor is popular. But as citizens, why is he popular? He's done nothing. Is it because when he comes here, he gives us 200 shillings every other day? And does that make the road that is in a very poor state better? So these numbers are also meant to help citizens reflect on the kind of leadership that they have and want to elect.
So it's not possible to stay back?
No, it's not possible. I think going forward, we will see more and more polling. In fact, at our organization, we poll every month and we release figures almost every month.
At your organization, you mentioned you prefer national sampling.
Yes.
As opposed to?
No, not. We have a national sample, but the only thing we don't do is break out the sample or the results into smaller subgroups like Jubilee versus Code supporters.
And why don't you do that?
Because when you do that, the margin of error is higher.
Okay.
Yeah, it's higher. So those results are only but indicative of what those subgroups think a particular issue. So we don't think also they're very important at the same time, because when you're dealing with water at a national level, we are dealing with security at national level or health at a national level, it makes no sense for us to look at them by various subgroups in terms of political loyalty. What is most important is responsiveness of the leadership in addressing the infrastructure or the health issues, irrespective of a citizen being expressing a negative or positive view based on their political side, the side of the politics that they support. Yeah.
But that's a line, you know, it's very difficult to draw.
It's difficult to draw, but at a national level, when you go to the hospital, a public hospital, which I think you've not gone to in many years.
No, I do. I go to Kenyatta National Hospital.
And does the doctor ask you that whether you are a Jubilee or...
No.
They treat you as a citizen.
Yes.
So that's why we focus on citizens in general.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
But just remember that there is always an interesting story on certain perceptions when you look at them by ethnic group or by political affiliation, because that political affiliation tells you a story that citizens in a particular way will wear some ethnic glasses and darken them depending on how they view the leadership. Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to talk more about that, and I'd like also to talk about how these figures are eventually broken down and how the media reports on these figures. And just as a, by the way, do you usually feel the media gets the figures right when they report?
Well, we have to give it to them because they get it right. The media or the people who report the stories most of the time, they're not researchers. They don't interact with statistics or statistical figures like me every day. And so most of the time, I think they have gotten it right. A few times there has been misreporting because, like I've said, these people are not researchers like us. So we always understand and try to probably get in touch with them so they can make corrections, but not many times. An example which I think I want to give, which was really something that drew our attention some time back, is when you have a figure of 45% and 44% in terms of presidential popularity ratings, and then you are saying there's a difference. There is no difference between 45 and 44 in a nationally representative poll because the margin of error is 2%. So it is a bit, actually it's sensational for somebody to say, now Uhuru overtakes Raila, or now Raila overtakes Uhuru, when it is just 1%. That is sensational and it is misreporting, and I think uncalled for. That is a statistical tie because they are both within the margin of error. It could go either way. Yeah.
Okay, and increase, in terms of increase of popularity, for example, approval rating, this time is 5%. and the next time is 7%. What do you work with? The 2 that has been added on top of the 7 in
I
totality?
think for me as the researcher, I would say insignificant. There's no change.
There's no change.
If it was 45 and today is 47, there's no change for me.
And to the layman, that's as a researcher?
What do to the layman, they would probably think, where has the 2% come from? So for us, we would just say the numbers, based on the previous figures, there is no significant rise.
Okay.
But a significant rise is above
5%?
Above 2%.
Above 2%.
Above, outside of the margin of error, you can start asking, even if it is 1%, you can start thinking, is it just 1 or 2 people, or is it something small?
But what do you use? The additional figure on top, or the in totality? Like if it was 45 and it's 43 and 48 now, what do you say?
I mean, it's starting to rise. It's just picking up. You cannot say it's risen massively. You can, because 3%, 3% is 1% or 0.8% outside of the margin of error of a poll that is nationally representative with a sample size of 2,000, which, because the margin of error, like I've said, if the sample size is 2,000, the margin of error is plus or minus 2.2. So if you just give me a 0.8 is insignificant. It's small, but it's just very narrow. It's narrow. It's thin.
Okay.
Yeah.
And between, I'm just asking this specific question because again we've gotten some fair share of backlash whenever we report this. In terms of giving prominence, if for example the contest between Jubilee and CORD, let me just say Jubilee and CORD, and Jubilee today is at 37% in terms of national approval, and then CORD is at 28%. And then the next time my research is done, CORD has risen to 33 and Jubilee is down at 35. Which one do you give prominence? The person who's risen or the person who has remained constant? So there is
Jubilee initially 37 and then now 35.
And 35.
And then CORD 28 and now
33.
33. I think the one for CORD is you can look at the numbers. That is a 5% increase.
Let's just put it at 3%. Both of them. This one falls by 3, the other one gains by 3. Would you give prominence?
Slightly. That the one that would probably stand out there is CORD. Because the one for Jubilee is still within some narrow range of interpretation.
So if I was to report and say CORD gains ground against Jubilee, according to
CORD gains ground, but Jubilee maintains. Yeah.
You have to make it that balance.
Yes.
What is the danger of not balancing that?
Because it then starts to look like you favor one side, which is not the case.
As the media or as the pollster?
As the media.
Okay.
Yeah, as the media. Yeah. So you have to Jubilee maintains, but CORD gains. Yeah. And you know, Jubilee could be maintaining, but CORD is gaining from certain areas, from either another political group or from the undecided. Okay. So you also need to check whether the undecided percentage is going down, or whether there is another political group, like another political group whose ratings have actually probably declined. So you need to look at them across the board. Don't just report on one side and without mentioning the others.
Okay.
Yeah.